Have you ever paused in the middle of anger and asked yourself, where is this coming from? Most people don't. They're too deep in the storm, too identified with the emotion. But here's the truth, as anger is not something others do to you. It's something you generate within yourself. No one inserts anger into your mind. No one forces you to explode. What you feel is your response, shaped by your interpretation of the moment. Once you fully understand that, everything changes. We live in a world that constantly feeds the illusion that emotions are caused by external events. Someone insults you, cuts you off, ignores your message, and you say, he made me angry. But really all he did was behave a certain way. Your mind did the rest. Your story about what happened, your judgment, your expectation, your inner need, that's what fueled the fire. The philosopher Epictetus said it well, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. In modern psychology, this is echoed in cognitive behavioral therapy. Between stimulus and response, there is a thought, and in that space lies your freedom. So let's get very clear. When someone triggers you, what's actually happening? First, there's the event, a word, an action. Immediately after, your mind labels it faf, that was disrespectful. They're wrong. I'm being attacked. That label fuels an emotional response. And once that emotion takes root, it feels automatic, but it wasn't. It was constructed quickly, yes, but not unconsciously. The good news is that if it can be constructed, it can be deconstructed. That is where mastery begins. To master anger, you don't suppress it. Suppression is control, not transformation. And control always breaks under pressure. Instead, you study it. You begin to see it as a signal, not a truth. You notice the tension rising in your chest, the sharpness in your breath, the clenching in your jaw, and instead of following it, you watch it, you pause, you breathe, and you ask what belief is fueling this reaction. Often, it's a belief that people should behave a certain way, that you should be respected, understood, validated, appreciated. But life doesn't bend to your ego, and people don't follow your script. Shi Heng Yi teaches that real power comes when you stop needing things to go your way in order to feel peace. That peace becomes your default, not your reward. And when peace becomes your baseline, anger has nowhere to anchor itself. But this is not about becoming numb or passive. Quite the opposite. This is about becoming conscious, able to respond rather than react. Anger may still arise like a wave, but you are no longer the wave. You are the ocean. You observe it. You allow it. And in allowing it without feeding it, it loses its grip. Slowly, your nervous system learns a new pattern: presence instead of protection, curiosity instead of judgment. This is a process. You will fail, you will slip, but every moment of awareness is a victory. Every time you choose the pause instead of the punch, you reclaim power. So the next time someone tests your patience, don't ask, why are they like this? Ask instead, why does this disturb me? That question is the beginning of freedom. And remember this, it is not what they do, it is what you choose to feel. Let me ask you something simple but profound. If how much of what bothers you is actually about you, and how much of it have you simply absorbed from others? Most people go through life like sponges. Whatever energy surrounds them, they soak it up: anger, gossip, tension, even insecurity, and then wonder why they feel so heavy inside. But what if the answer isn't to change the world around you, but to change how you relate to it? One of the greatest shifts you can make is from being someone who absorbs energy to someone who simply observes it. This is not detachment in the cold, distant sense. It's clarity. It's the wisdom of knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. Most of the time, what upsets us didn't even start inside us. Someone else's bad mood, their judgment, their negativity, we take it in without questioning it. We let their emotional state dictate our own. And in doing so, we lose control over our own inner space. Shi Heng Yi speaks often about the power of the observer. The observer is not the part of you that reacts, complains, or defends. It's the still part, the one that watches without judgment. When you train that part of yourself, you begin to live from it. And when you live from it, you stop taking things personally. You stop being so easily pulled into the emotional storms of others. From a psychological standpoint, this is called emotional regulation. From a spiritual standpoint, it's non-attachment. From a practical standpoint, it's freedom. Because here's the truth: was your peace is disturbed not by what others bring to you, but by what you choose to pick up and carry. Imagine walking through a marketplace where people are handing out bags of emotional garbage. You don't have to take them. But most people do, out of habit, out of fear, out of the need to be liked or the fear of seeming cold. And then they wonder why their emotional load is so heavy. The mind that has not been trained to observe becomes a slave to its environment. If someone smiles at you, you're happy. If they frown, you're anxious. If they praise you, you feel worthy. If they ignore you, you feel invisible. That is not freedom. That's emotional dependence. And emotional dependence will always lead to suffering. But the moment you realize that you are not your thoughts and not the energy of those around you, something shifts. You become the sky, not the weather. You start to notice when someone's words are really about them, not you. You stop internalizing glances, comments, silence. You watch, you reflect, and most importantly, you stay grounded in yourself. This isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming centered. Because the one who observes is always in control. And when you're in control of your inner space, no one can manipulate you. No one can throw you off course with their moods or their drama. You remain stable, not because the world is calm, but because you are. It's not easy at first, especially if you're used to reacting, especially if you've built your identity around being emotionally available or highly empathetic. But remember, empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction, and awareness without training becomes self-deception. What you need is conscious, disciplined observation. So the next time you feel that wave of irritation or tension rising, pause, don't act, don't speak. Ask yourself, is this mine, or am I absorbing what doesn't belong to me? That question alone has the power to break the chain. And never forget, you are not here to absorb the world's noise. You are here to master your own silence. Have you ever considered that the very people who irritate you the most might be your greatest teachers? Not in the comfortable, agreeable sense, but in the uncomfortable, confronting way that forces growth. Because here's the paradox: what triggers you often reveals what is unhealed within you. And until you see that clearly, you will keep mistaking discomfort for injustice and miss the deeper invitation. Most people believe their triggers are about other people. He's so disrespectful. She always talks over me. They never appreciate me. But what if those reactions aren't about them at all? What if they're revealing something much more personal? Your need to be seen, your craving for control, your unresolved insecurity. Triggers are rarely about the surface event. They're about what the event touches within you. That's why they're so powerful. And that's why they're such effective teachers. Shi Heng Yi teaches that our enemies are not those who insult us, but those who cause us to forget who we are. The same goes for our emotional reactions. When someone's behavior has the power to pull you away from your center, it means you've given them access to something you haven't fully understood yet. That's the work. Not blaming them, but studying your own reaction. In psychological terms, a trigger is a stimulus that evokes a strong emotional response, often rooted in past experience. These responses are not logical. They are conditioned. They happen quickly, often before you can even name them. But just because they're fast doesn't mean they're uncontrollable. In fact, the more you study them, the slower they become. You start to notice the pattern of, whenever someone interrupts me, I feel disrespected. Why? Because as a child, I wasn't listened to. That old wound is still open. Say, once you see that you're no longer reacting to the present moment, you're reacting to a memory, a wound that hasn't healed. A part of you still waiting to be acknowledged. That's the real source of the anger, not the person in front of you, not the tone they used, not the timing, but the meaning you gave it, based on something far older and deeper. This is why triggers are not signs of weakness. They're signposts pointing you to the next layer of your evolution. Every time you're emotionally disturbed by someone's words or behavior, you're being given a mirror. You can smash the mirror, or you can look into it. One brings temporary relief, the other brings lasting transformation. But looking into the mirror requires courage. It's much easier to blame the world than to investigate the self. Easier to say, they need to change, than to ask, what is this teaching me? Yet this is where true strength lies, not in controlling others, but in mastering your internal response, in using each emotional sting as a call to self-inquiry. So how do you do that in practice? First, awareness. You have to catch the reaction as it rises, not after you've yelled or shut down or walked away, but as the emotion begins to form. Then, curiosity. You ask yourself, what does this moment remind me of? What part of me feels threatened? What story am I telling myself right now? Finally, you let go, not by force, but by understanding. When you truly understand the root of a trigger, it loses its grip. This is not something you master overnight. But every time you stay present with your discomfort, instead of projecting it outward, you take a step toward emotional freedom. You begin to see people not as problems, but as mirrors, And in doing so, you reclaim your power. Because in the end, your triggers are not your enemies. They are your guides. Follow them, and you'll find the parts of yourself you're still waiting to meet. There's a deep misunderstanding in modern life that peace comes when everything goes your way. That when people treat you right, when circumstances are smooth, when the world respects your preferences, then you'll feel calm, happy, and centered. But this mindset is the exact reason most people remain emotionally fragile. Because as long as your inner state depends on external events, you're at the mercy of things you cannot control. Detachment is the antidote to this dependency. Not the cold kind of detachment that turns you into stone, but the powerful kind. The kind that frees you from being ruled by craving, fear, or ego. Shi Heng Yi often reminds us the more you need from the outside, the more vulnerable you become on the inside. True strength is quiet, it needs nothing. And in needing nothing, it becomes unshakable. Think about how often we suffer because of attachments. You expect someone to call you back, and they don't. You count on someone to appreciate your efforts, and they don't. You attach your peace to their behavior. And when that behavior doesn't meet your expectations, anger follows. But the issue isn't the other person, it's your attachment to how things should be. This is a subtle but profound shift in perspective. You don't suffer because of what happens. You suffer because you wanted something different to happen. The event isn't painful. The resistance to the event is. Detachment, then, is not about withdrawing from life. It's about engaging with life from a place of inner independence. Psychologically, this ties into the concept of internal versus external locus of control. When you live from an internal locus, you recognize that your thoughts, your choices, your interpretations create your experience. But when you're trapped in an external locus, you give that power away. You let others' actions write your emotional script, and you become reactive, resentful, easily disturbed. So how do you develop this inner detachment in a practical way? You begin by observing your needs, not material needs, emotional ones. The need to be validated, the need to be seen, the need to be right. These are often invisible, but they drive most of our reactions. Every time someone threatens one of these needs, you get angry, not because of them, but because they've touched something you're clinging to. This is why spiritual traditions across cultures emphasize the practice of letting go. Not letting go of love or connection or purpose, but letting go of the belief that your peace is conditional. Conditional on praise, conditional on control, conditional on agreement. When peace becomes unconditional, detachment becomes your nature, not your effort. And this doesn't make you passive. On the contrary, it makes you more powerful. Because when you're detached, you don't react blindly. You don't argue from insecurity. You don't need to defend every opinion or win every interaction. You become clear, direct, calm, and that kind of presence changes the dynamic in any room you enter. This is the paradox of detachment. When you no longer need to control others, you gain true influence. When you stop chasing outcomes, you move through life with purpose, not pressure. And when you let go of needing people to behave a certain way, you finally become free to respond from wisdom, not wound. So the next time you feel disturbed, ask yourself, what am I clinging to right now? What outcome am I attached to? That's the thread you need to release. Because in the end, as the less you hold on to, the more you rise above, and it's in that rising where peace becomes permanent. There is a moment, so brief, so subtle, that it's often missed entirely. A space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Most people don't notice it. They live in automatic reaction. Something is said and the reply is immediate. A look is given and tension fills the body. But what if I told you that in this brief lies your greatest power? The power not to be controlled by habit. The power to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. This is where mastery begins, not in suppressing your emotions, but in expanding the space between stimulus and response. That space is everything. It's where awareness can enter. It's where you can choose something different than what your conditioning would have chosen for you. Think about it. When someone insults you, what actually happens? There is the insult, the sound of the words, and then there is a flash, a thought, a judgment, an assumption. That flash triggers emotion, anger, embarrassment, defensiveness. And then almost instantly, there is reaction. Words fly out, energy shifts, you're caught in it. The insult now controls your behavior. But if you could pause even for 2 seconds and observe that flash, you would see something. The insult is powerless without your agreement. It only gains power when you personalize it. This is why the pause matters, because it gives you access to choice. And choice is where all growth begins. Shi Heng Yi often emphasizes that awareness is not about changing your emotions, it's about seeing them clearly. When you pause, you allow yourself to witness the emotion rise without becoming it. You notice the anger, the irritation, but you don't immediately act on it. That slight delay, the breath, the silence, is what prevents chaos and allows wisdom to surface. From a psychological perspective, this is called cognitive diffusion. It means creating distance between your thoughts and your identity. You are not your fear. You are the one watching those emotions arise. And if you can watch them, you don't have to obey them. The ancient Stoics trained themselves to master this pause through daily reflection. They believed that reason should always lead emotion, not the other way around. In Buddhist practice, this space is cultivated through mindfulness. And in martial arts, it's the stillness before the strike, the calm that decides whether action is necessary at all. But let's make this practical. How do you develop this ability in daily life? It starts with intention. You must intend to stay conscious, especially in moments that typically cause you to react. Then comes training, small moments of pause practiced consistently. Someone interrupts you. Pause before responding. You feel offended? Pause and breathe. Even just slow breaths can interrupt the pattern. Over time, you rewire your nervous system. You're no longer a puppet pulled by old emotional strings. You become responsive instead of reactive. And that is not just emotional maturity. It's spiritual evolution. People often mistake quick reactions for strength. But real strength is restraint. It's knowing you could react, but choosing not to. It's choosing clarity over chaos and purpose over pride. And that kind of strength doesn't shout. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply stays still, observes, and acts with intention. So the next time you feel yourself on the edge of a reaction, remember, you are not obligated to respond just because you've been triggered. There is a moment, a breath, a choice, and in that choice lies your freedom. Because in the end, your greatest power is not in how loudly you react, but in how silently you choose G. Who exactly is getting angry? When frustration arises, who is it that feels offended, insulted, dismissed? Most people have never paused long enough to ask that question, but the answer reveals everything. Anger doesn't arise from your higher self. It doesn't come from awareness or clarity. It comes from a very specific place, the ego. The part of you that is identified with your name, your story, your image, your expectations. And the more tightly you're attached to that identity, the easier it is to be disturbed. That's why someone can look at you the wrong way and suddenly your mood shifts, or someone disagrees with your opinion and you feel personally attacked. It's not because the other person has real power over you. It's because your ego is fragile. It's constantly seeking validation and control. It depends on agreement to feel secure. And when that security is threatened, it fights back. That fight is what we call anger. But there is another part of you, the observer. The one that notices what's happening without immediately reacting to it. The observer doesn't get offended. It doesn't need to win. It doesn't require recognition or agreement. It simply watches. And the more you identify with that part of yourself, the less power anger has over you. Shi Heng Yi often speaks of this shift, not as a technique, but as a transformation of identity. You move from being someone who reacts to everything to someone who witnesses everything. And that witnessing brings space. In that space, emotion still arises, but you're no longer consumed by it. You see the anger forming, but you don't become the anger. You feel the tension, but you don't identify with it. This is not suppression. It's transcendence. Suppression pushes emotion down. Transcendence rises above it. And the path to transcendence always begins with awareness. The ability to step back and ask, who is reacting right now? Is it the conscious self or the egoic self? Psychology calls this metacognition. The ability to think about your thinking, to observe the mental and emotional processes as they happen. It's a form of internal distance, and that distance gives you perspective. From that perspective, you begin to see that most of your emotional pain isn't caused by events, but by your identification with the role you believe you must defend. When someone says something harsh, you can ask, is this truly about me, or about the image I've built myself that now feels threatened? If you're deeply rooted in your worth, you won't need to defend it. But if your sense of self is built as your shifting sense of approval and appearance, then every comment becomes an attack. This is why ego reduction is not about becoming less. It's about becoming more real. The more you release your false identifications, the more grounded you become in what's actually true. And what's true can't be offended. Now, this doesn't mean you don't care it doesn't mean you're passive or indifferent. It means you care from a deeper place. You respond with clarity instead of reactivity. You speak from centeredness, not from the need to prove. You remain firm, but you're not hard. You are still, but not stagnant. This kind of identity shift takes time. It takes daily practice. But the reward is profound. A life where you are no longer hijacked by every passing emotion, a mind that no longer clings to every opinion, a heart that is no longer held hostage by the ego's demands. So the next time you feel anger rising, ask not what did they do to me, but who is it in me that wants to react? That question, when sincerely explored, is the beginning of true self-mastery, because in the end, you are not your ego's defender, you are your soul's observer.